In today's lectures, I'll be discussing about two things. One is about the pineal gland and thymus, and after completion of this part, I'll be discussing about some sample questions from endocrine physiology that may be asked in the university exam, and even so those questions may be important for your upcoming exams too. So let's start with the pineal gland first. So here the most important features that I am going to discuss about the pineal gland is the structural basis and the synthesis of pineal glands, and the most important thing is the role of melatonin hormone. See here, if you see the locations of the pineal glands, it is basically located in a specific part of our brain, and this pineal glands, like other glands, it is very important. Though it is present in the brains, but as it involves some endocrine functions, that is why the pineal gland is also known as the endocrine gland, right? See, the pineal glands, which is also known as the epiphysis, it is located in the diencephalic area of the brains, that is above the hypothalamus. And if you see the shape of the pineal glands, it is a cone-shaped structures, and out of all the different type of endocrine glands, this is the second smallest endocrine gland. And the most important cell types that makes the pineal glands is the large epithelial cells, that is also known as the parenchymal cells, and some of the cells are called the neuroglial cells. This is just basic structural features of the pineal glands. The most important things is about the secretions of the pineal glands and how that secretions is physiologically important for us. See, the most important type of secretions is melatonin. The melatonin basically it is a type of peptide hormones, and that peptide hormones play a vital role in physiological systems. Now, question is, what are the most important features of the melatonin and how this melatonin are secreted? See, these hormones, melatonin is a hormones, and these hormones is naturally produced by the pineal glands, and it is basically derived from a specific amino acids called serotonins, and this is also known as hormones too. It modulates the sleep patterns, as well as it involves the synthesis and secretions, and both synthesis and secretions are controlled by certain factors, and the most important factors is the light, right? The secretions decreases with the lights and increases in the dark. So this lens is very important. This means the secretions of the melatonin is influenced by these conditions, and at the same time, we could say, in presence of light, there is a lesser level of secretions from pineal glands. Right? Other than this, pineal glands, it's also produced from other parts of the body, like gastrointestinal tract, and some other parts like bone marrow and leukocytes. So these are some of the important features that is related with the pineal glands, as well as we could say these are the features of the melatonin. Now, question is, what is the exact mechanisms of the secretions or synthesis of melatonin? As I've already mentioned, these are the two important conditions that stimulates the glands for the secretions of the melatonin hormone, right? So one is the daylight and another one is the dark, right? Both the conditions influence the functions of the pineal glands. See, yes, it stimulates the pineal glands, mainly the cells that is stimulated by the dark conditions. And here's, this is the general flow of pineal gland, the melatonin synthesis. That is initially we could say the most important things that involves the melatonin synthesis is the involvement of a specific type of amino acid, that is the tryptophan, right? Here, other than these tryptophans, certain types of enzymes also played an important role. Now we'll see what are the most important type of enzymes that takes part in the synthesis of melatonin, and what are the different states that helps to the release, synthesis of melatonin hormones. See, the most important points. Melatonin is synthesized in the pineal glands from the amino acids, that is the tryptophan, through a multi-step enzymatic process. It means in this particular process, there is a number of enzymes involved that ultimately helps to the proper synthesis of that particular hormones. At the very beginnings, the tryptophan is converted into 5-HTP, that is 5-hydroxytryptophans. So you can see this was the tryptophan. At the initial reactions, it is converted into 5-hydroxytryptophans, and these reactions is catalyzed by specific type of enzymes, that is tryptophan hydrolase or tryptophan hydroxylase. Now see, after that, a certain conditions affects the synthesis of these melatonin hormones, or certain conditions affects the overall pathway of synthesis. In darkness, serotonin is converted to N-acetyl serotonin first by the rate limiting enzymes, and the enzymes which is known as the rate limiting enzymes here is AANAT, that is aryl alkylamines and acetyltransferase. So these enzymes also known as the rate limiting enzymes for the melatonin synthesis. And finally, the melatonin, this N-acetyl serotonin is converted into melatonin by some other enzymes like hydroxyindole O methyltransferase or methyltransferase. You can see here, this was the tryptophans or 5-hydroxytryptophans. It further undergoes through cascade of biochemical reactions, and those reactions are catalyzed by some other types of enzymes. 5-hydroxytryptophan first converted to serotonin in presence of 5-hydroxy-L-tryptophan hydrolase enzymes, and that serotonin is converted to N-acetyl serotonin in presence of another important enzymes, that is serotonin and acetyltransferase enzymes. And finally, this N-acetyl serotonin is converted into melatonin in presence of methyltransferase. So here's in this flow or chart, what I've actually explained that what is the initial substrate for the melatonin hormone synthesis, what are the most important type of enzyme involved, and what are the intermediate produced, and what is the conditions that influence the melatonin hormone synthesis. Now see, here after the synthesis of the melatonin hormone, the next event is the secretions of that melatonin to the target cell. So here also a specific pathway is involved, and that pathway ultimately facilitates the sufficient secretions of that melatonin into the target site, so that target site shows their physiological activities. So here you can see what are the most important states that involve with the secretion process. The first events is the detections of the light, right? And this light is detected by a specific type of neuronal cell, right? And the name of that neuronal cells is photosensitive retinal ganglionic cell, and that is present into the eye, right? And these ganglionic cells contain certain types of pigments that is very much sensitive to the light. So during the secretion of melatonin hormones, the most important thing is the detections of that light. Based on the nature of the light, the secretions may be altered. After that, there is a signals called light signal that reaches to another important part of the this particular pathway. So what is that part? Light signals travels via the retinospinothalamic tract to the suprachiasmatic nuclei to the hypothalamus, right? So here you can see this is a condition where light is absent, right? That condition stimulates the ganglionic cell, right? And after the stimulations of that ganglionic cells, how this light signals travels to the next step. See, it travels via the retinohypothalamic tract to the suprachiasmatic nuclei that is present in the hypothalamus, and that is basically involves in a specific physiological events, that is the regulations of the circadian clock, right? This is the master of circadian rhythm. Here, this circadian clock actually influenced by not only melatonin. There are several other factors that also can influence the circadian clock or rhythms, but the most important role is the melatonin. Here, the suprachiasmatic nuclei interprets the light signals and it regulates the rhythms, that is circadian rhythms. In presence of light, it inhibits the secretion, right? But in presence of darkness, these inhibitions is removed. So these points is very important. So once it reaches to the suprachiasmatic nuclei, based on the nature of the stimuli, it decides whether it releases the melatonin hormones or not. Now, from suprachiasmatic nuclei, signals are sent to the paraventricular nucleus. That is also an active part of this secretions pathway, and that signals exit the spinal cord and they form a synapse in the superior cervical ganglions. From there, postganglionic sympathetic fibers innervates the pineal glands. It means there are numbers of nerve fibers that innervates from a specific part of this pathway, and these innervations is very important because these innervations actually carries a certain type of signal, here the light signal. And once it reaches to the pineal glands, there is a secretions of a certain type of catecholamines, right? Mainly, this sympathetic fiber releases norepinephrine during darkness, and that binds to a specific type of receptors that is present into the cells present in pineal glands, that is pinealocytes. And after that, norepinephrine increases intracellular cyclic AMP levels that activates a specific enzymes involved with the secretory pathway, and that promotes the conversions of serotonin into melatonin. See here, as I mentioned, this is the general pathway. Once the light signal reaches to the suprachiasmatic nuclei, it processes to the next steps, that is paraventricular nucleus. Here, from this particular pulse, based on the nature of light stimuli, it releases the catecholamines, and that catecholamines will bind with specific type of cell receptors. The receptors are present in the pinealocytes, and after the binding of that, after the binding of these molecules to the receptors, it stimulates the second messenger system that I mentioned. That it stimulates the second messenger systems, and second messenger systems ultimately activates the cascade of molecules by the phosphorylation events, and at the end of the second messenger pathway, there is a changes in the gene expression patterns that ultimately either increase or decrease the productions or synthesis of this particular hormones, and ultimately they act to the target cell. Now, Here, as we have seen, this melatonin hormone, what is the most important functions of that melatonin hormones is it is basically involved with the regulations of rhythm, that is circadian rhythm. And if you see the secretion level, it is affected by different point of time, right? So how it is affected, I mean how the secretions is affected, you can see in the x-axis this is a different time points of a particular day, and in y-axis it is the level of melatonin secretions, right? As I mentioned, the receptors or the cells, that is the ganglionic cells, that is stimulated based on the nature of signal, so whether it is the signals coming from daylights or dark night. So here you can see during this particular time, like 2 p.m., if you see the level of melatonin is already in the near the baseline, but with the changes of the time, see the pineal gland begins producing melatonin in the evenings, and if you see the level of secretions here, that is around 20 picogram, right? And it's now rapidly increasing with the changes of the time, right? And it reached the peak levels, and that levels mainly you can see the peak levels may occur the midnight. After that there is a sharp decline. Again you can see it is again about the near the baselines. It means this hormone secretions is influenced by different time points. So why different time points? Because in different time points the stimuli, that is the wavelength of a particular light is of difference. So to stimulate the ganglionic cells, obviously as I mentioned, the darkness is the important conditions that can stimulate maximum, and once it stimulates the ganglionic cells, it will further enters into the succeeding or cascade of reactions into the synthesis pathway, melatonin synthesis pathway, as well as secretions pathway. Now, what are the most important functions of that melatonin? One function we have already know, that it mainly involves the regulations of rhythm, right? So if you see the flow chart or the diagrammatic representations, what are the other important functions that is carried out by the melatonin hormones? The most important is the regulation of circadian rhythms and regulation of sleep. These two are the most important part, right? Other than this, it was found that it not only involved with the regulations of circadian rhythm, it not only involved with the regulation of sleep-wake cycle. At the same time, it shows some anti-inflammatory properties. It also shows some metabolic properties, because these melatonin hormones also influence the different metabolic events. And at the same time, so in presence of melatonin, the radical scavenging activity also influenced. That is what is mentioned. It has some antioxidant properties. It was found that whenever the level of melatonin is high, the free radical, the concentrations of free radicals is less. It means in presence of this melatonin, it helps to scavenge the free radicals. So that is why we could say it has antioxidant properties. So these 5 are the most important properties that is mainly influenced by melatonin. So along with this, melatonin also takes part the regulations of some other pathway, like it involves the neurogenesis pathway, right? And it also involves the melanogenesis. right? So these are the secondary regulations of melatonin hormones. But we could say the primary regulatory mechanisms or primary rule of the melatonin hormones are this. These five are the five primary rule. So in that aspect, we could say, like other endocrine hormone, melatonin is also physiologically very, very important. Now, here's is the therapeutic use of melatonin. It is basically used for the treatment of various types of diseases, like the treatment of cancers. It involves treatments of some immuno disorders. It also equally important for the cardiovascular disease, and it is very much, these points is very important to those who are having this type of conditions like depression disorders. In their case, the melatonin can be used as a part of therapeutic treatments, and it is also used for those subjects who are having some sexual dysfunctions and those who are having fertility problems. So these are the some important diseases in which melatonin can be used as a therapeutic drug. Now see, the next important part of today's discussion is the thymus gland. Though it is mentioned here in the endocrine sections, we have already know the thymus has the thymus explains in another part of the competency, that is, I think, the circulatory systems. Here you can see the thymus is an organs of the immune systems, and this thymus gland basically produce a specific type of hormone that is called thymosin, right? And that thymosin contributes to the developments and differentiation of certain types of immunocell. So what type of immunocells? That is the T cells. We know that the T cells is most important one, which involves the immunoregulations. So though it is the endocrine glands, but what we have seen here, the most important involvement of that glands is the immunoregulations by the productions of a certain type of WBCs, mainly the T lymphocytes. Now, what are the most important hormones that is secreted by thymus gland other than thymosins? You can see Thymopoietins and Thymulins, also important hormone that is also synthesized by thymus gland. And in all these cases, you can see this thymosins involves with the developments of the T cells. It means it promotes the T cell developments, and this is involves the differentiation of the T cells, and Thymulin involves means it enhances the T cell functions. So it means the thymosin hormones, mainly we could say the thymosin hormones directly involves with the regulations of our body immunity by producing certain types of immunocells, because we know the rule of T cell, right? So here it somehow involves with the generations of antibody, or we could say it helps the B cells to produce the antibody. So that antibody is important for the body immunity. So you can see here the most important part, functional part, is the body immunity and central organs of T cell maturations. I mean, here as thymosin involves with the maturations of the T cells after the differentiations, and along with this, another important things, the role of the T cells is it ensures the T cells can recognize major histocompatibility complex molecules. And other than this, it has some other rules, like it eliminates self-reactive T cells to prevent the autoimmunity. So here the thymosin, who shows the immunoproperty by producing the T cells. So how it shows its immunoproperty. One is by producing the T cells, but the differentiations of the T cells, but the maturations of the T cells, and ultimately by producing the antibody. But at the same time, what we see, it has some other rules. It eliminates the self-reactive T cells to prevent the autoimmunity, right? So this is again another important point that is related with the thymus gland. See here, in today's lectures, what actually I wanted to explain from previous topics, that was say pineal glands, the most important part that we have to look after, that is the secretion pathway and how this melatonin hormone involved with the regulation of sleep-wake cycle. This is the most important point. Or how this melatonin hormones involves with the regulation of circadian rhythm. And from second part, we have to focus on the main part, that is what is the role of thymosin hormones and how it involves with the regulations of body immunity. This two part is sufficient from these two topics.